Call this meeting Thursday, August 4th, 4:30 p.m. Special Planning Commission meeting to discuss the comprehensive plan elements, resilience, and natural resources to order. Could I get a roll call, please?
Vice Chairman Charlie Whitmore.
Here.
Commissioner Rich Delcor.
Here.
Commissioner Jim Flynn.
Here.
Commissioner Lydia DePaul.
Here.
Commissioner Jason Stewart. Chairman Amanda Denmark. Commissioner Kathleen Duncan.
Okay. Notice regarding adjournment. The Planning Commission will not hear new items after 9:30 p.m. unless authorized by a majority vote of the commission members present. Items which have not been heard before 9:30 p.m. may be continued to the next regular meeting or an additional meeting date as determined by the commission members. Notice regarding public comments. Every member of the public who is recognized to speak shall please address the chairperson and in speaking avoid disrespect to the commission, town staff, and other members of the meeting. State your name and address when speaking for the record. Officially, comments are limited to 3 minutes. We've been very lenient during this process with that because this is more of a workshop, more informal. But if in the interest of time we have to make it more succinct, we'll deal with that when it happens. Can I have a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. There were no minutes to approve. And for the record, Kathleen Duncan is here now. Welcome.
Thanks.
Okay, do we have any public comment for items not on the agenda?
We do not.
Okay. Is there any old business?
No.
Seeing as there's none, new business. We have the workshop to discuss the natural resources and resiliency elements for the Blueprint Bluffton and update long-range comprehensive plan for the town of Bluffton. And Charlotte, did you want to, we'll just defer to Kyle? Okay, Kyle, it's all yours if you want to bring us through the beginning of it, and then as we get to the elements, we'll involve the public.
That sounds great. Thanks you, Commissioner. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate you joining us here for this fourth session of 5 workshops that we've got planned here to cover our wheel of topics. So for the commissioners and for those of you that were in the audience or maybe tuned in online, our discussion earlier this week on Tuesday, we talked about land use and housing. Appreciate all the comments that were shared there. As I mentioned during that meeting, we're continually taking this feedback and working it into our revision schedule and planning for how we address these ideas, additions in a rolling way. So for tonight's discussion, we've got a couple of topics on deck that are obviously very critical to your community and very important, not just to the quality of place, but also quality of life for residents, be they human beings or wildlife for that matter. We want to be talking about natural resources and a brand new topic for comprehensive planning as part of this round, which is the resilience or resiliency topic. So I'm going to quickly share a screen here, just pop that agenda up one more time and get into our, as we have been, some thoughts on comments that I've received thus far. Either it's from the Planning Commission or from other staff or other bodies around the town. So again, purpose today, discuss some of these comments, concerns, ideas that you have, commissioners, as well as invited stakeholders and members of the public. Thank you all for being here and being part and contributing to this important conversation. And ultimately, I think for this evening, like all of our other workshops, we really want to determine a pathway forward here in a schedule of thoughts and revisions that we can be making to move this closer to where you all would like each of these chapters to be. So, and a quick note from the commissioner earlier here, I actually like to invert the order here and begin our discussion here talking about natural resources tonight. But what we'd like to do is for each of these, I can provide a quick summary of what I've heard in your feedback in terms of resonant or frequent comments, broken down into a couple different categories. I'd love to have some discussion around each of our two topics here tonight. And I think together, think about what's the right pathway for any of these revisions, additions, whatever they may be. Before we jump in, I would just like to also say that quick reminder, August 10th next week, I think that's Wednesday, we'll have our final session of the 5 focusing on a very important topic here, economics, and our capstone piece, which is the priority investments chapter, or the kind of the implementation section, of this work.
Kyle?
Before I proceed, I'm sorry, any questions about our agenda for this evening?
I just have 2 quick comments. First of all, I actually said that backwards earlier. I think we're going to camp most of the time on resiliency because that deals with our natural watershed, our rivers and so on, but we'll see how it goes. But number 2, we were having a discussion beforehand. The workshops that we had 2 weeks ago, how are the rewrites of those coming? Because we're concerned that we're going to be handed all of this 3 or 4 days before the meeting on the 17th and have to go through 5 sections. We were hoping and even under the impression that we might start seeing some of these rewrites of chapters that we've already gone through so we can go through them again as revised.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Commissioner. I appreciate that comment. And we will begin with resiliency. That makes sense. So in terms of the revision, yes, we have been working through chapters as these comments have come up and working hard to get you revised copies of each of those. I'll let staff speak to the specifics, of the schedule here, moving forward. I do have some concern given that our final topic, will occur on August 10th, and it contains a pretty significant amount of comments, and being able to get that turned around with enough time for you all to be able to review that with the 17th. But we can talk specifics on that schedule. I'll let staff, represent that moving forward. But yes, we're working hard to address each of those things in a rolling way. I'm not going to wait until next week, to get these things, addressed and nailed down.
Okay, just note that it's an item of, I don't even want to say concern, but we're very interested to start seeing some of these revisions as soon as y'all can provide them. Any other questions? Okay, go ahead, Kyle.
Great, thank you. Well, we'll begin our discussion this evening in a new chapter here as part of our wheel or R10 within the comprehensive plan. This idea of resiliency, whichever word you would like to use. Remember, we've got these 3 sections of comments that we are trying to summarize within this document. We talk about substantial, subjective, and then simple. Sorry to keep defining these. Just want to make sure anyone that's tuning in is well aware of what we mean by these terms. Very quickly, simple means not necessarily it's spelling or grammar. That's beyond simple. But I think what we talk about here are edits or suggestions that have been made by commissioners that are very straightforward. The direction is clear, and we're planning to go ahead and just pick up those edits. We are indeed doing that right now. A subjective pieces, I think, is an area where some discussion tonight will be very helpful, but also working with staff to determine how we, articulate some collection of comments or single comments, within the draft, how they are indeed addressed. And then lastly, where I'd love to start off our conversation this evening in this chapter has to do with the substantial pieces. So areas where you all have brought forward some thoughts, ideas about how to expand, connect, or indeed make clearer some of the thoughts that are going on within the chapter as it exists right now. So I'll quickly begin here, and then I'm really interested in just opening up some conversation on this topic. It's very interesting, as you all know, given where you sit, in the world, and what the next 10 years means in the town. So as we walk through this, and remember, I'm provide a summary on what I heard through your comments. First, I think the idea of generally expanding references specifically to stormwater management throughout this chapter are critically important. Serious, take that note. I think within this, not just in terms of the system, but also the surge potential with whether it is large water events, hurricane, whatever it might be, thinking about and presenting that system in a more robust set of analysis. You remember that in the community facilities chapter, we also discussed expanding references to that stormwater system in that section. But this is an area where I think you'll find with a lot of this chapter, there is a significant overlap between topics here and how they may be presented or introduced maybe in other sections of the plan. And additionally, related to that, wetland information and inventorying in this section do need to be expanded. And with the intent here, I think of relating how this system relates to your overall resilience, specifically related to in this case, natural disaster or other mitigation pieces. But we want to make sure that that section of this is expanded in the next version. In terms of our storm surge, we did have a storm surge map series in this, and this would typically be placed into the simple category, but what I want to make sure is that this map series is quite clear in terms of what it means and also what it does not mean. I think when you look at storm surge maps, it's easy to go right to your home and say, I'm on high ground or whatever it might be. But I just want to make sure that within this presentation, especially in this topic, that it's clear what we're presenting and then what this means in terms of other trends that are going on in the community right now. This is an area that I think we should try to seek some overlap to other topics. And indeed, some of the comments that we received related to this pointed in that direction as well. In terms of positioning the narrative, I think there was a number of comments that I really appreciated here about trying to make sure that what we're presenting in this section really hits on ideas and priorities of the community as they've been demonstrated through past comments and engagement. And we think about things like the canopy cover, access to any of these blue or green assets that are out there in the community, water quality, air quality. We want to make sure, and I certainly take this note seriously, that we're positioning this narrative in a way that is really not just relatable, but also I think hits back directly on comments from the engagement that we've heard throughout the work. And additionally, the last piece here, and I'll be quiet after this, is the idea of clarifying this relationship between water quality and other environmental trends, and or I should add to this, and or other land use trends as well. So that there is a relationship between land use planning, transportation planning, and indeed that underlying water quality, which again, this is another one that you look at the kind of the Venn diagram overlap. We talk about the water system recharge. We talk about that provision piece is also related to the facilities component. So I'd like to stop there and take some comments and thoughts, I think, from commissioners and from the community, and have some discussion on this very important new chapter.
So who'd like to start? You don't want to start?
Oh, you
Well,
really?
like Kathleen, I was looking at Rich, but
I guess to start with, if we're assume we're making sure that we are talking about resilience and not natural resources here. I see a lot of emphasis when it comes to sea level rise and stormwater, but in terms of resilience, I think if you're looking at it from a lens of hurricane impacts, which is when I think assuming that there is sea level rise, that's when you're most going to see that impact and non-king tides. But those hurricane events, which have increased in frequency of late, that there's more to it to look at than just our stormwater. There's wind load impacts and emergency routes, and I don't know that we've fully fleshed that out. And I think I understand why you've put it under subjective, but I think of it as a substantial issue. To me, resilience is far more than climate change related items. It is just the number of threats you've listed it. I think as this is what you're intending is number A here, resilience to reflect a full threats. Our community doesn't just anticipate hurricane events or sea level rise or climate change. We're looking at potentially financial impacts with economic downturns, material food shortages, and so I don't think that this is I don't think it's subjective. I think resiliency is it's an all-encompassing term, and it's not just an environmentally related facet of resiliency, if you're going to use that term. I think somebody else said there was a point in one of the comments that I'm going to find, and I'll reiterate as well, but we can take a pause on my comments at the moment and move on to others.
I would echo, as rereading this last night and then looking at, because we've referenced things like the sea level rise adaptation report in Beaufort County. I was looking at that. First of all, I think we've done a really good job for the first time identifying areas to go work on, full stop. I think the work that the staff and the consultant have done are very good. But like Kathleen, I want to see, I would like to see more about, are we prepared for evacuations? What about debris removal? What about, where do we house people if they can't get out? I don't know if, maybe it's in there and I missed it, but having something more than just stormwater and sea level rise, because there's also, if you, and I hate to say it, but there's lots of cities who've had horrible things happen to them, whether it's tornadoes, floods, shooting incidents, and the resilience of those cities really comes out. And I don't know how much they've planned for it, but should there be additional items in our resiliency plan that talks about things in a little bit more emphasis more than the stormwater and sea level rise?
Commissioner, really quickly on those points, I appreciate your comments. I think if I could just try to clarify a little bit, I think you seem to be dipping in the idea of the emergency management planning or preparedness, which, as you know, is countywide and a holistic effort. And I think it is an area, perhaps within this work, where we could point to and also add narrative and articulate more around how that sort of planning is ongoing. In what they seek to cover and prepare for, which I can tell you is an extremely wide range of potential events, well beyond just hurricane. I believe that's something we can well cover in the plan.
Well, and one of the things about resiliency is this is that topic that kind of weaves with every other topic. And so there's a little, I have a challenge wrapping my head around what we should be addressing here, elsewhere, both, neither. But Commissioner Flynn, did you have any?
No, I mean, I've read it, and I'm trying to still digest quite a bit of the, like I said, the storm frequency and intensity. And I'm looking at that and saying, gee, what happens if, and again, sort of what Commissioner said earlier, how will we handle it from an emergency standpoint? If something really drastically happened, how would we handle it as a town? So I think something should be addressed to that level in there.
Thank you.
I did find the additional comment that I found. This was the Palmetto Bluff Conservancy's comments on resiliency. It was their first comment, and I just think it's worth echoing. This section seems human-centered instead of system centered. And until they said that, I did not pick that up. And I thought, we look at this so much from how's these changes that are around us are going to affect us, but we didn't ask ourselves, how is it going to change the plant animal life around us nearly as much as we thought about what's it do to us.
Well, I was holding this one back, but it actually dovetails with what you just said. The thing that's kind of screams out to me that's not in here, and it does have to be a part of natural resources as well, is for most of the people in the room have moved here from somewhere else. And it's dealing with the fact that we do not have the normal stormwater flow here that you have elsewhere. You know, where I came from, you try and get the water off your property into the creek, down to the river, and out to the ocean. Here, if we get too much fresh water in our rivers, because they're brackish rivers, we will lose those rivers. We'll lose the oystering. So one of the things on the resiliency is how equipped is our community, how equipped is our land, how is it designed so that we keep that from happening? You know, whether it's an example of Hampton Lake is actually a big stormwater retention pond to keep water from flowing into the May River unabated. We've got development going on 278 in the county and about to be in the town up near the headwaters of the Okatee. We need to make a priority on resiliency of keeping that fresh water out of these rivers, or we're going to ruin them. And so I think that needs to be that water flow issue, and how is that addressed, and making sure that it's a priority. It has been, and it needs to continue to be, and even more so. But that's one of the things I noted. Dovetails perfect from what Palmetto Bluff Conservancy said.
And I think it might have been Mr. Delcor who said that this, and maybe it was somebody else, that this really does, the resiliency chapter really touches on every other facet of this and every other element of this comprehensive plan. So part of me, when I look at the resiliency chapter, I look at it like it's kind of taking the inventory of those other chapters and applying that information in an analysis form with objectives. So it's almost to me a component that actually sits more towards the end of this book or this package, to say we've looked at natural resources, and natural resources, by the way, should be more than parks. But we're looking at our natural systems, our assets, and what does that mean from a resilient standpoint. But I think the resiliency could literally break down by an economic resiliency, a cultural resiliency, environmental resiliency. It is touching on all those other pieces, and all of them are part of the language of resilience. And like Mr. Delcor said, I don't think it was verbatim, it may have been my interpretation of his words. You look at these communities and how they bounce back from these events. It is so community-based. It is a culture of that community and how they respond. I know that when we had Hurricane Matthew, that was when the Bluffton Hilton Head Ask Answer page really started, and everybody got in and were like, we need this. Who's got information on that? And it's still to this day is something that's carrying through. We're a community that talks to one another, that helps one another, that comes alongside one another. And so I think of resiliency as much as anything else as a resource chapter as well as an analysis chapter.
A phrase came to mind when you were saying that, and that is good stewards. I almost think of resiliency as the chapter of how are we good stewards of our economy, our resources, our people. But did you have any?
I'd actually love if we can do some of the public comment, just because I saw the email from Mr. McCracken about impervious surfaces and how we're measuring our success with stormwater, and I feel like that's, to me, one of the biggest things I'd like to see addressed in the resiliency component, or natural resources, but I really feel like it needs to be in both.
Okay. If Commission is ready, public comment
For resiliency?
for resiliency. And some of these may overlap between the two, but
Katie Epps?
And then just a reminder, state your name and address.
Katie Epps, 605 Sandy Shoals Pass, Bluffton, 29910. I'm here as a staff member of the Palmetto Bluff Conservancy, and unfortunately, our education and research coordinator is out of town at the Bat Blitz, so I'm reading for her. For resiliency. This section seems human-centered instead of ecosystem-centered. This is problematic when phrasing how we build resiliency within a landscape. The resiliency is based in natural ecosystem processes, regardless of whether they benefit the human who live in that ecosystem. For example, green spaces were mentioned many times in this chapter as a way to provide wildlife habitat and recreation space. What does the blueprint consider optimal wildlife habitat to be? Is it grassy parks with no native plants that are sprayed with pesticides? These are great recreation spaces for humans, but are not really optimal wildlife habitats. And our other comment for this section, are the only planned wildlife habitats those that are in wetlands that cannot be developed? If so, there should be others mixed in that are connected to the wetland network. What is the proposed shape of these habitat patches? Thicker chunks or sections with more interior habitat space are better for many species of concern as opposed to narrow sections. Has the size, shape, and connectivity between patches been discussed?
Thank you.
Carmen Manning.
Carmen Manning with 111 Quarter Casting Circle.
Can I pause you for 1 second? Just to make sure, and I think everybody on commission knows, but everybody in the room, you also serve on the Watershed Advisory Committee.
And just to be clear, I'm really giving my comments and the comments I submitted this afternoon as a citizen and based on my credentials, because the Watershed Committee, I tried to put it on the agenda for the last meeting, and we couldn't do that. And then at this last meeting, we really didn't get a time to talk about it. So I'm not comfortable, I'm not
Well, no,
talking
I'm not-
on behalf of them.
I'm not saying you're on behalf of them, but you are a member of that committee, and
Yes.
you're aware of some issues that maybe we're not even aware of that you might be able to help with. So I just wanted to posit you as more of an expert than some.
Oh,
How's that put?
Okay, thank you. First off, let me say thank you because, like I said, every time I come to this meeting, I learn something new. And your concern for the evacuation and making sure the emergency response. And so I was sitting here thinking, oh, these guys know what they're doing because they've had hurricanes here. They know what they're doing. I am firmly in favor of including that because in my roles, I was the incident commander, and I had a HAZWOPER team, and we had to respond, and we had to do it quickly. I would work with the fire, the police. The governor in Rhode Island called us the best in the state. They relied on us besides their group. And I understand what that does to a community. I understand the need for notifying people and how you get that done and all the resources that it takes and the quick action. So certainly that needs to be included. I just assume that here you guys all know that and do that. Now, you know, up in Jersey, everybody's got an LEPC because of all the hazardous materials. So it's kind of built in. Everybody knows that. So, you know, and certainly I would offer my help. And I mentioned my husband was, you know, responsible for getting the utility up and running. And I'll just share with you the difference between being ready and not being ready. Superstorm Sandy, the weekend before, his phone was constantly ringing because every hour there was another conference call. We got to get ready. They're bringing in tree huggers on planes from California. They were setting up tents in Newburgh, tents in Long Island, bringing food for the people, get cots. Everybody's ready. So then Superstorm Sandy came, and finally on Wednesday, my office called, and they said, hey, we got power, come in. So I got in my car, tried to drive to work. I can't get out of the town because every street, there's a tree down. So I'm driving around. I finally get onto 206, and there's all these tree huggers from North Carolina lined up on 206. I said, guys, what are you doing? The trees are all down. Go over here, Fox Chase, go on 24. They said, lady, we're trying to get communication from JCP&L. They're coming out here with a guy with a clipboard. There was no organization. We were without power for 11 days. And I was not on the shore. I was up in northwest Jersey. Totally unorganized. So it's important to plan, is my point there. You got to think about the worst case. What could happen? Do you have the resources? Do you have the people? Do they understand the sense of emergency? So anything we can do to help, we're happy to do that. Going back to the plan, I think, and again, this is again my experience, natural resource section needs inventory for all of those critical items. I gave you a list that's in the Beaufort County one. You got to talk about the birds and the bees, the flora, we used to call them the birds and the bees, the trees, the wetlands, and specific, I don't care what they're doing up in Florence and Charleston for Bluffton. What are our wetlands? So that's number one. That needs complete, it's not about parks are man-made. Golf courses are man-made. We're talking about nature, okay? And then with resiliency, I hear all the good talk, and that's great. I gave you my notes about this whole topic because I think you have to be very careful. The Act says one thing, okay? It's being interpreted as many things. And I point out to you the recent EPA case, the Supreme Court decision, when agencies overstepped what they were legally allowed to do. I'm not saying we shouldn't be looking at all these things, but you have to keep it in perspective. And that was the gist of all my comments, to keep it in perspective. And lastly, and then I'll go away, probably the last time I'm going to talk, and this gets into the watershed, okay? And it was my husband who pointed it out to me. My whole career, his whole career, we had a standard. You had to meet the standard. And sometimes it was very hard to meet the standard because it wasn't just one standard. You go in Jersey, there's pages of standards. And it changes in the top 2 feet and the bottom 2 feet and all kinds of things. And I'm kind of shocked. We're not worried about the standard here. And based on my experience, if you're not meeting the standard, you got a consent order or you have some kind of timeline that you say, well, it's going to take us time to fix this. I don't sense that. And I gave you some pictures. And this is really the critical part. I kind of know a lot about this. And when I drive, we just drove here, right? I'm driving down Bluffton Parkway. And I see the sediment things. Some half are on, half are off. Okay? It rained yesterday. And I think somebody commented to me, even with this new ordinance, the PEs, they don't really know what they're supposed to be doing. And when I see people in even our development, and for example, just simple things, and for example, I also did safety, okay? Safety's I wanted people to come into work and go home in the same shape. And I see the landscapers with a blower, no hearing protection. That bothers me, okay? Because I know we're hurting his ears. And sometimes they got it around their neck, and I'll go like this, and they'll put them on. And that's my point with the environment. There's a lot of things I see here we're not as vigorous. And that river and the other rivers here are precious. They are precious. They're outstanding resources. That classification is reserved for the national parks. Do you realize how special that is? So we need to do everything we can to protect it. And I really think the runoff is the key. Yeah. So I'm sorry to take this amount of time, but it's passionate. It's what I did for 35 years. And I'm happy to help, And I'm not a crazy you know,
We're all a little
environmental
crazy.
crazy person. I like to do things that are pragmatic and that work. I like to do the things that work.
Understood, and thank
Thank you.
So
you.
thank you.
Did we have any other public comments?
For resiliency, no. Is there anyone that came in late that did not fill out a public comment form that wants to discuss resiliency?
Yeah, and I think as we get ready to tie this up, Kyle, I do think we're going to spend a lot of time on natural resources. So I don't mind having the extra time. I think Commission probably feels the same way.
Sure. Just to be clear, Commissioner, are we ready to move on? Are we on any more comments?
Well, let me look at the commissioners. Do we have any more comments we want to add? You are getting the public comments that have come in, correct? Especially the
I
one
am.
from Palmetto Bluff. They're experts in the field, so I think what they say we need to listen to loud and clear.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
if I could make a comment regarding one of the comments that Ms. Epps had stated. It talked about, the need to focus on the habitat beyond just the wetlands. Just to remind this board that, Beaufort County is potentially moving forward with a referendum for the Greenbelt referendum, which is a 4-year, 1-cent sales tax for a maximum of $300 million that can be used towards the purchase of land, conservation easements, and the buy down of density. So, just putting that out there that, beyond just the town of Bluffton, there are other agencies that are doing, that have things that are going on, and this is one of them. Potentially, we go in front of the voters, and if they voted on it, then that's additional funds that the town could then tap into to purchase some of these properties that we're talking about to start to save some of this land. So, just reminding you that there are other, there are potential revenue sources out there to assist in this.
Well, and that's a great reminder, and Kyle, that probably should be put into this chapter, work with other municipalities and/or the county to identify and
Yeah.
work on that. I mean, I can think of, the Open Land Trust has helped us to have Wharf Street,
Yeah.
Oyster Factory Park the way it is, and others throughout Bluffton. So, yeah, that's a good point.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, Kevin, I'm really glad you mentioned that. I think one of the themes in this chapter, not just like some of the other chapters, is, a lot of this, a lot of these areas are going to be areas where you are collaborating, working with partners, working with a region, state, fed, whatever it might be level, or nonprofit, folks that are out there and very effective that can help you accomplish these goals. But if I could quickly summarize, Commissioner, a few of these comments, I think the idea of the emergency preparedness, even if it is just inventorying the system that is in place right now, which you being on the coast, susceptible to just the hurricane season alone means that you have that extra level of scrutiny within that body. But want to make sure that we include that in this chapter, as well as bolstering a number of these inventory components and making reference to our partners and what those partners could mean in terms of specific actions or projects for you all moving forward. I'd just be very interested in, you being at the table and having a loud voice at that table when these things are discussed.
Can I ask one more question? And again, maybe I just, either to Kevin or Kyle, when we talk about emergency preparedness, and we were talking about some things, one thing that I realized when I was just in New Jersey last week is what happens if there is some kind of a spill or anything in or around the May River? Whose responsibility is that? Is that some U.S. government, county government? Who's responsible for managing something like that?
DNR, isn't it?
See the guys back here raising their hand?
I'm Bauer, I'm the watershed manager. That is a responsibility. If it's before it hits the river, it will be the Beaufort County Fire Department. They do all spill management. Once it makes it to the river, it becomes DNR and DHEC responsibility.
And there's things that are published like that we could go refer to. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, so I mean, there's no point in reinventing the wheel. It's all there.
Okay.
And they're trained for it,
Yeah.
or not.
I think another interesting component, specifically when you're talking about resiliency and the emergency management Bluffton, while we are not an island, we are connected to people that do drive to an island. We are connected to people that rely on that island. And so if for some reason that bridge goes out because of hurricane, because of some other issue that arises, we can potentially find ourselves in a world of trouble locally. So I don't know how that weaves into the emergency preparedness or how that weaves into resiliency specifically. But that is a very specific feature of Bluffton that isn't necessarily common to all places. That is one way on and off, and if that group of people can't get on and off, that creates some issues here in Bluffton.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Okay. Kyle, you want to
Are
wrap
we ready to
this
move on?
one? Yep.
Okay, great. Well, the other topic for this evening, again, talking about the Venn diagram is very well, overlapped, I think, with our discussion here around resilience. I want to talk about natural resources. So for this component, I think you're going to see a lot of similar comments in terms of substantial pieces to what we covered in community facilities. Generally, I really would like to expand, I think, on the inventory within this section in a number of areas. And I'll do a screen share here to pull up my document just so that we're all on the same page. Doing it now. Yeah. Right, natural resource. So a key item here as we think about the substantial edits that are necessary in the chapter, and indeed that we have even begun to make as of today. As of we got their comments, the idea of expanding on the inventory of the systems that are present in the community. So some examples that we got from commissioner comments, which I really appreciated. One, thinking about canopy cover, oyster beds, tidal marshes, anything that can be mapped. I really would like to have that as part of our analytical series within this chapter. In addition, going back to the point, Katie, I appreciate you being here and I appreciate you making the point about wildlife. Obviously, that is a unique and contributing factor to not just your sort of eco profile, but who you are and tourism, quite frankly, as well. So that habitat piece needs to be present in this chapter. There's a major missing piece, I think, within this section that I'll admit that I think we tried to cover in resiliency, but it needs to be reiterated within this section, which is the idea of water resources alone. Meaning just how critical and complicated that series of topics and points are to who you are, and how that relates to other sections within this plan, land use, economic development, transportation, all topics that were at least implicitly mentioned there in our discussion we just had, right? So I believe that in the next version of this plan, we really ought to not just highlight, but isolate and highlight the water resources inventory in this, and perhaps work with staff to see if there are specific actions that may relate to that particular area. As the gentleman from Watershed was, brightly pointed out, in a lot of this management, there are overlapping series of responsibility, especially when it comes to disaster, but also when it comes to just pure management. So I think, and along with just the inventory, would be good to know as part of this section. Really, maybe it's a kind of the who's doing what. I think within this section, just to show not just the policies that are at play and the statutes, but also the groups that are active, whether they be state-sponsored, public, or they are indeed nonprofit friends of style organizations that are working in this particular area. And the last section, and I think we talked about this quite a bit during our facilities discussion 2 weeks ago. But the idea that the parks component, while they may fit here in terms of, as we talk about access to these natural resources, the pure inventorying piece really better fits and is better suited for the community facilities section. So we've already begun to reorient that chapter to reflect that note. I do believe that there is still some need for reference for what you've done as a community, which is very commendable, to get your residents into these places, you know what I mean, that are unique, that are contributing, that are green, that are blue, whatever they might be. You've done a lot of tremendous work to turn those places out, and that access leads to understanding, leads to education, and all those in respect, stewardship, the words that have been mentioned earlier in the conversation. So while I do still believe that there is a component of this chapter that may reference, again, access through resources and principally through some of your park resources and investments within that apartment, the inventorying of this, I believe, as you point out rightly, probably belongs in that community facilities section. So with that, I will be quiet. We can talk a little bit here about the myriad of topics that might be included in this natural resources chapter.
Commissioner Thun, do you have anything you want to?
Not at this time. I got a couple of things I want to talk about afterwards, but.
Well, the only thing I would say is, again, I love the idea of 3.1, establish and promote blueway trails. I'm curious, I see Beaufort County has done a fair amount of it, and again, maybe this is for staff. Have we done anything like Beaufort County has done for blueways? I mean, it's a great idea. I don't know where we're at as far as Bluffton is concerned.
Well, I didn't catch the very first part of the question.
Well, it seems like Beaufort County has done a lot in identifying county blueways trails, paddling, canoeing, and so forth. And I see that we've mentioned it in item, I guess it's 3.1. I would love to see a little bit more action behind that, or maybe there's a timeline that we'll talk in priorities. Have we done anything like that so far?
Charlotte, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the county picked up all of it.
Yeah, I believe so. I'm not aware that we've.
Yeah, I mean, have we done specifically for blueway trails? No, we have not. Has the county? Yes. So it's on a county-wide level.
So we're included in the Beaufort County stuff. So then what would 3.1 mean then for an action item?
Where are you looking?
The natural resource action item 3.1. If we're already in Beaufort County, then what would that do?
What page is that?
It's on 114.
Give me a second.
Commissioner, if I could to hop in on this one, I think, what would be critical for us to include in here some definition around what a blueway actually is. I don't know that we do that well enough in the document right now. And you're right to point out the work that the county, has forged there already. And perhaps a better verb, I think, to lead into that action, Commissioner, might be the idea of really more of leveraging the work that's gone on, I think, at the county level. It's not atypical because these trails do cross borders, for this to be more of a regional effort than a local one. But I think as we think about the infrastructure that can accent, that type of amenity, you think about streetscaping along a state route, right? I mean, these are things that are becoming more and more used, more and more recognized, and are truly unique for for where you are, where you sit in the country. So we just saw them as a tremendous opportunity, and if the word is leverage, we can do a better job of talking about what that would mean to truly leverage, those early trailways.
And again, I really just got back from vacation myself, so I did not get in much detail on the Beaufort County plan. I skimmed it. I didn't see stuff in and around Bluffton, but that might be because I just missed it. So I guess, I'm sorry?
Really, the most logical one that I know of is along the New River, and that is accessing into the county's future passive park that they're going to construct, so.
The old rice
so-
fields.
Yeah, the old rice fields, so I mean, they are working on that, they understand that is one of the components to that park. So that's something that's being captured through the county.
Okay.
I mean, I think acknowledging it and assisting where we can is great, but, I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel and try to create it.
I'm not arguing with you.
Well, I
Yeah.
think that's why he brought it
I
up.
think to establish and promote would say, we don't need to establish it, right?
Yeah.
I think Kyle's point is right. Is there a way to leverage it and educate the community about the blue ways that are available in Bluffton as well as Beaufort County and in general? It's a great tourist thing of using the natural resources we have.
I think the best thing is just to cross-reference
Yeah.
with other documents.
Kind of like what we were talking about with emergency services. Work with.
Yes, because that's all taken care of, like emergency services. The evacuation routes, that's all addressed. It's all addressed, and it's not, we are a part of it. We have a component, but like the Beaufort County Sheriff's Office, they're the emergency management group for Beaufort County. So when there's a disaster, they take the lead, and then, we have our own, portion that stays here, but we have staff that go to the county as well. So I think, also to not bulk up this document so much to where you can't even read it with all this information is definitely making those cross-references to other documents and other agencies.
Yep.
Which could be served as an appendix, really. Like, you don't even have to write that within, a lot of those references, a lot of those, packages, like the school district, master plan, things like that. All of that could be listed in appendix, kind of by category. I'm not saying you don't make references entirely, but the kind of the longer form of that reference can all be in an appendix in the back, I feel like. So it's not bulking up the rest of it, and you're not.
And then it's just electronic links to everything. I mean, really, that's
Oh, yeah,
that's the best way of doing it.
yeah.
Well, let me, let's get back on topic with Commissioner Duncan, if you have any comments, if Commissioner Delcor is done, or do you have?
Yes.
Okay.
I would say one of the things that's a bit of a struggle is because this is so parks focused and not, to me, natural resource focused necessarily. And I think that there's a fairly substantial rewrite as a component to this. There's a lot of missing inventory that's a component that, that should be here. So it's hard to actually grab onto the things to talk about the things specifically because they're just not here. I'm happy to engage in a discussion about the parks aspect of this, even though, again, I think it more relates to that community facilities section. But I just want to address that it's hard a little bit to get into the natural resources because of how it's written. In terms of the parks, it's an interesting, you've gone through this process of giving a park score and kind of addressing how the way that we're measuring it isn't really working. I don't think that was the exact word choice, but that's how I interpreted it. It's one of those that I'm looking at this and you're analyzing it from what's within a 10-minute walking area. You're not looking at what's necessarily in the private communities. When you do, we by far and away outscore anybody. And really, parks, all of them have a different service area. So if you are, like the Buckwalter Recreational Master Plan that's coming out with tournament level soccer fields and tennis facility, that is a service area that's much more regional in its approach. So it's not about it being within a 10-minute walking distance of that park. You could have a small open space in a community that, you can go take your dog to go, do their business. But a 10-minute walking zone for that isn't necessarily the prime piece, way to measure that either. Just because there's 1,000 people within a quarter-acre park doesn't mean that that's an appropriate level park for that group. So it's an odd choice of measurement. I would much prefer the C-taken approach from the parks planning of here's a community, regional park, here's a community park, here's a neighborhood park, these are the service areas for those. How well is Bluffton really covered? We've got this number of swimming pools. Typically, a community of this size should have this many swimming pools. If you've got this, you've got this community has this many tennis courts, we should be having this. I understand that there's really a lot more work to be done, and actually in a parks and recreational master plan. It's really a much bigger target that you've got to be in detail that you've got to be getting into. But this isn't really helping serve the dialogue that needs to happen as a part of that. I think you can say we do need to do a deep dive and make a recommendation for that, but on a general basis, this is where we're maybe stacking up compared to where we probably should be. That's
Commissioner, I really appreciate your comments in the draft pertaining to that issue around a park type or typology. I think they're well placed. I will say that you are quite unique in just the amount of private green space that is active. Not to say that private is inaccessible to folks, but the fact that that is a fairly unique element for you all. So I think I'd be looking for a little bit of advice on, and maybe we'd work with staff, on this about how to treat or talk about, those spaces within the commentary. I think it's quite clear from your comments about developing out, again, some typologies for each of these green spaces, because you're right. I mean, a regional park is just different fundamentally in nature than a passive or neighborhood, centered green space. So we can do a better job. We'll do a better job within this section, and possibly placing, I think, that conversation, like you rightly point out, into the facilities discussion as we walk through that inventory of all of the spaces that are out there. I think as we talk about access, we brought up walk sheds, but there are other ways of measuring that, of course, acres per resident, whatever that might be. We'll dive into that. We'll talk with staff about the right way to reorient some of that access discussion.
Comments? Public?
I just have one
Other
more
thoughts?
question. Is the new inventory that's going to be included, is that going to have needs assessment as part of that? Like, so we can know a little bit more, not just what we have, but some analysis on that in terms of what we need and what are our action items from here to get what we need?
Hey, Commissioner, when you talk about the inventory, is that specific to the parks discussion we're just having, or is that the broader inventory within natural resources itself?
Natural resources.
It's hard with some of the natural resources topics in the sense that we think about what we have, what we need. The way I've interpreted your comments in this, when we talk about the natural systems, they are those, the physiography, the hydrography, the ecosystem, you all work and play within. I think it's a little bit difficult within that to determine exactly what point of view becomes out of that, other than maintaining and stewarding this environment moving forward. But I'd be open to some great conversation, I think, on what we can do to, again, add point of view to some analysis within this. I mean, the obvious thing would be to say you're becoming more gray, right? The green might be disappearing, at what rate, and what's an unacceptable rate for you as the town. But I think beyond that, we just need to, I think, be creative in this chapter to consider, one, what you can control as a community through the other mechanisms like land use, transportation planning, economic development, and two, what is the DNA here within the natural resources section that is essential to maintain for you to be Bluffton, 10 years from now, 20 years from now? That's a convoluted answer, but it's a bit of a difficult one, I think, to fully apply in this section.
one of the things I was looking at. There was a comment earlier that referenced online GIS database with all kinds of wonderful information. And one of the maps that I brought up was kind of looking at those natural areas. And when I looked at it, I immediately saw how some of our biggest areas are just not connected. So, we've got these patches, but we don't have the corridors between them. And that the group that was doing all of this work was discussing kind of this idea of how do you kind of lace those in, weave those, weave that fabric in together, and how do you kind of bring those corridors through? And I think Bluffton has a lot of challenges pertaining to that, just because a lot of, where those patches are along the perimeter, and our interior is primarily what's been developed. So I think that it's starting to look at where can we potentially create those, how do we potentially create those corridors, and where should those corridors be? Where do they make sense to be? So that's, to me, one analysis that I thought about when I was looking at it. Again, going back to our oyster beds, I tend to think of, okay, where are those located? What kind of buffering would be ideal? What kind of buffering do we have? What buffering are we still able to kind of hold on to, so that we can, or how do we encourage people not to encroach on that buffer if we don't have it codified to protect those moving forward? So that's where I start thinking of in terms of analysis, is how do we protect those resources that we still have?
Right. That's helpful. Thank you, Commissioner.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, just a reminder that for the comprehensive plan, over the next 10 years, this is kind of like it's a roadmap for staff. So we're not answering all the questions with this document. What we're doing is we're giving, in essence, projects for us moving forward. So a lot of these things are going to be they're the unknowns as of right now, and that's where we will be doing the research on all of these. We talk about these connections, but we actually start coming up with plans like this. This gives us to move it forward into the strategic plan with town council on this is a 10-year plan. They look at 2 to 3 year plans, and then we can start adding some of these things in the strategic plan, because we have to start funding them. So the research, a lot of that costs money. Like a lot of the analysis, we need time to work on all those things, and then we can start to realize, here's our pinch points, here's the areas that we need to focus on. So just remember that when we're going through with this plan, we're not answering all these questions.
Well, and you're hitting exactly what I was going to comment to. We need to remember that this is broad strokes.
Yes.
This is not, we need to put 5 more trees on Buck Island Road. This is, as Kevin said, it is broad strokes. So sometimes, we're all very passionate about this, and I think and I do it myself, we get down into the details when we've got to kind of give that guideline. I do have a couple of thoughts to share on this. And Kyle, obviously I've been around here for 30 years, which is shorter than many, but longer than some. And you're new coming into this. When I first got involved with politics back in 2007, Coastal Conservation League held an event. It was I can't remember, it was a 1 or 2 day training for elected and appointed officials that I went to. And I'll never forget that, because it really helped me to start understanding more about the rivers I love around here in this ecosystem. And I may be stating facts wrong, so don't, certain people in here that check facts, if I get the numbers wrong, I'm sorry. But by my memory, what we were told is 50% of the saltwater wetlands on the East Coast are in North and South Carolina, and 50% of those are in Beaufort County. We have a lot of saltwater wetlands that can get ruined here. We have, as a town, I'm speaking in the colloquial, we have done things like put retention tanks. Matter of fact, Mr. McCracken, when he developed, I can't not call you Mayor McCracken. Mayor McCracken, when he developed the stock farm, had to put a tank under there to capture the fresh water so it didn't run right into the May River. Promenade is like that. These are some of the things, and Kyle, the reason why I'm going down this road is these are some of the things that I think we need to talk to or address in the natural resources, is almost the methods of keeping those natural resources. Maybe natural resources isn't the right section, but we need to talk about how important impervious surfaces are.
Yes, sir.
We almost, as a town, did the May River streetscape all with concrete sidewalks. until we stopped and said, look, we're asking everybody else to do impervious, we need to do impervious. And that's why there's brick there today on the sidewalks. You know, an identification of impervious. What was the, Al, you might remember this, what was, I can't remember his name, he came and he said, once we reach, I think it was 10%.
Fred Holland. Dr.
Fred Holland, Dr. Holland, said, once we reach 10% impervious, we've lost the ability to do what our ecosystem does. And at build-out, are we going to be more than 10%? I think everybody in this room believes that's the case.
Fred Holland also said if we allow our waters to come out here.
So you can be on the recording, Al.
Oh, the microphone's fixed.
Oh, does it?
Yeah,
Okay.
So,
Dr. Fred Holland also said that once your waterways become impaired, or saltwater marshes, that the community's health and the value of your homes will decline. And so he cautioned us all on that. And so that's why we've been fighting stormwater for so long. I'm on the Watershed Action Committee. I'm also on the Open Land Trust Board. And I understand protecting our wetlands, our headwaters, and our water supply that comes to Beaufort County, because it comes out of the Savannah River, which is over 300 miles long. So I understand all this is very important to me, controlling stormwater. Just 20 years ago, when we started putting hard surface everywhere, we didn't know the negative impacts of runoff at that time. We kind of had an idea that it would be problematic, but we didn't know. And a lot of research was done by the Department of Natural Resources, Dr. Fred Holland, others, myself, Dr. Chris Marsh, Spring Island.
That's right.
And so we started trying to find out what would happen to the environment. And what we found was, and now with the new study from USCB, we know that we're seeing lower salinities in our headwaters, for example, and those are nursery areas for marine shrimp, for example. We also know that you'll lose oyster grounds and other shellfish grounds as well because of stormwater entering those upper reaches of our estuaries. So we also know that in certain areas, we see salinity drop from 25 parts per thousand to 0 in 30 minutes. Well, zooplankton and larval shrimp can't get out of the way when salinity drops that quick, and it can cause mortality to finfish and crustaceans. So stormwater is a hammer to them. It's bad for the environment. We've seen channeling from large volumes going from certain areas instead of having the snake-like estuaries. We're starting to see straight line. We're seeing freshwater plants grow in the saltwater marsh. That's not supposed to happen. So things are changing because of uncontrolled stormwater. One of the things that I'm pushing for really hard on the Watershed Action Committee is that once we put these stormwater ponds in, that's it. Nobody manages them. And we pump water out of the ground to keep them full. So it's just like a hard surface. So once it rains, and you get a hurricane with 10 inches of rain, it falls right on top of the water and overflows and can cause flooding. I know areas around here where when you get a super high tide, the storm flaps on those outfalls can't open up. So if you get a lot of rain at that time, it overflows the banks. So there's a lot of things we can do to protect what I consider our greatest open space, our greatest recreational space, our greatest green space, which is the Bay River and surrounding marshes. And I don't think we're doing a good job of managing that.
Well, Mr. Stokes, just for the benefit of people who are here who may not know this, can you go ahead and qualify yourself as to why you know what you know?
Spent 41 years with the Department of Natural Resources, managing or directing the Waddell Agriculture Center. And that's taught me a lot because we were spawning all kinds of marine fish, crustaceans, and finfish of all kinds. So I know about their habitats, what they need, their requirements, larval requirements, feed requirements. So I've learned the hard way by making a lot of mistakes.
So to say you're an expert in the field is probably an understatement.
I
That's a
know.
nice statement. But Kyle, I also had him say that so you understood how important this is, and things like Al just brought up, managing the stormwater ponds, that needs to be a part of the runoff discussion. And I didn't even realize so the communities aren't managing the ponds. And
No,
so,
we pump one out of the ground, just keep them full. It's an amenity to most communities.
yeah. So that's, I mean, that's another part of either this natural resources or another section is the importance of keeping that fresh water out because we're going to lose the wildlife.
And you mentioned parks, and I certainly agree we need park space. But you know, the May River is a park within itself. People go out and watch birds. I like to watch birds. I know a lot of them. And crab and people shrimp and fish and all, they're out there having boating activities. The sandbars recruit hundreds of people. So it's a park within itself, and it needs to be taken care of.
And it's a swimming pool too.
Dolphins, yeah.
Are we ready?
Thank you.
No, and we'll probably call on you again, but thank you. And I don't get a chance to say this publicly very often, but thank you for your years of service because this place we live in is a better place because of you.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it.
And I'm sure I've eaten some of the fish you've spawned and have been caught. How about, we okay with doing a little bit of public comment and then we'll keep?
I've got two
go ahead.
comments. One, and you mentioned, you know, how important the May River is and our other watersheds, but I think it's really important to note that we are more than the May River. We're touching the New Riverside. We've got Colleton River, and so those definitely need to be a major, you know, point of influence in addition to the May River. And I had one. Absolutely.
You're absolutely correct, and our committee is looking at these other watersheds because once the water comes down the estuaries and they mix, they go in all the sounds. Beaufort County is quite unique in a number of ways. We're in the middle of the Atlantic Bight, a big curvature in the coastline, and we have no freshwater rivers or streams, so everything is tightly controlled. We have the highest tidal amplitude on the East Coast. It's a very unique area, and because of that, we have more spire-tidal than any other county in the state all combined, or saltwater marsh. This is a very special place. The watershed includes Port Royal, Colleton, and May River. All the other watersheds do not drain in Beaufort County. We're responsible for our own water. That is very unique within this state.
Well, and Kyle, I think a watershed map should be part of our natural resources so we can tell where things drain as well.
No doubt. No doubt.
And one more thing. Do we have, I know we have master plans for communities, we have master plans for our Old Town. I know that we've got the action plan for the May River watershed. Is there a natural resources master plan for Bluffton? Not county, for Bluffton, looking at our natural resources and our,
I don't know of one per se.
I mean, I know the county has probably some, I think,
Look, I mean, what all is on this map? By natural resources, what do you mean by natural? I mean,
well, what I'm saying is, one, we do need to do more inventory here. And one of the things that happens when we do these other communities is we've given a lot of, we flush out a lot more of these concepts related to that specific community. But we don't, as far as I know, we're not looking at our natural resources in great depth. We're looking at the May River watershed. There's an action plan for that. The county's looking at it from a county standpoint, but I think that there are things specific to who we are in terms of oyster beds, in terms of our specific watersheds, in terms of our canopies, like you were to your point earlier of that we're looking at this from a higher level. We can't really be getting into the weeds on this and super great analysis, but perhaps this is a place to say maybe Bluffton does need their own natural resources master plan.
I mean, are you looking for like oyster beds, things like that, or like what? I mean, what?
I think it goes back to looking at an analysis of how do we protect those, what are our greatest threats, where are our greatest opportunities. It's just as you said, you can't cover everything related to natural resources in this plan. Perhaps we make a recommendation that we do have a document that does take a closer look at.
I would say that would come out of the May River, the watershed.
Right, it's more than that. I mean, it goes to canopies, it goes to...
They handle more than that. It just happens to be named that. correct?
Yeah, as far as watershed go, right now, we only have a watershed-based plan for the May River. We are talking about that with the May River Watershed Action Plan to expand that, but right now, we don't have water-based planning for the other watersheds, the New River, the Okatee, the Colleton. That's something we were looking at, but nothing so far.
Well, and I think you
I
could
didn't
also
realize
look
that.
at migratory patterns of birds. You know, that's been a discussion that comes up with pieces of land that come up all the time of what birds are here, where are they coming from, where are they going? We're looking at, it's not, we are so much water, so much of our natural resource is the water focus, but we are more than that as well. It goes back to this idea of canopy and upland areas and how those areas are addressed.
Can I,
If I can share just.
Let me,
before-
hang on just one second. To your point a minute ago and to what you said, sir, Kyle, I think we ought to look at putting in here as a recommendation to expand the May River plan to other waterways and make that a goal in,
I think that's already,
I understand, but it can be verbalized in the comp plan and that helps you have the,
yeah, and I think, it sounds like some of the things that you're looking at go far beyond our staff capability. I mean, migration of birds, while that's important, that's not our wheelhouse.
But there are pollinators to be thought of around here. I mean, like, this is not,
That-
that's why I'm saying this is a natural, like, it's not just a watershed, it's a natural resources.
That's a lot of information with limited resources. So there are probably other agencies out there that do that work. Now, what we can do is we can put a comment in there that we, research and find what other agencies are, have this information, and then we can kind of cross-reference it. But to go out and try to, create that research, I mean, that's impossible. It's impossible. We don't have the staff to.
It's coordinating with other agencies at the federal and state level.
Yeah.
It would not be a local initiative on something like bird magnet, even fish for that matter.
Yeah.
It just would be too large for us.
well, let me pull us back in.
Thank you.
I think
That's
working on the different watersheds is a worthy goal, and I think it's already being worked on, so verbalizing it or visualizing it in here makes sense. You wanted to,
Well, I just, normally, if we're hired to go help a municipality, so we'd never been there before, we go to the town office and you would start flipping through the books. And every town already has this, it becomes boilerplate, right? The birds don't really change and the forests don't change, the soils, the geology, the climate. It was kind of boilerplate, but I think what we're suffering here is that Bluffton has grown so quickly. And so you don't really have that history, or you haven't had to pull that information together. So I understand the staff is very, very stressed in trying to do a lot of things. And I point that out in my note to you about the recommendations. But I think at some point you do have to come up with that. It should be boilerplate, that this is the natural resources of Bluffton. And it should be in every,
understood and heard.
I just want to
Stokes.
regarding oysters, the DNR is actually using drones to map oyster beds now. And so they do that because they want to see the changes after hurricanes, sea level rise, migration of oysters. As water levels rise, they'll migrate toward higher ground, things like that. So that work is already being done. There's some really good papers out on bird migration. I think Beaufort County has 2/3 of the island hammocks and islands and hammocks in the state. They serve as rest over stops for songbirds during migration. And songbirds fly at night where predator birds fly in the daytime. So that's been well documented about, please don't bush hog an island hammock or an island because birds only nest 10 or 15 feet off the ground. And if you go in there and bush hog and burn and all, then you lose all that nesting sites. A lot of work's been done on that. It just means you need to grab it if you want it.
okay, question? Or you want to go?
Can I ask a quick question with Mr. Stokes mentioned there with the drone mapping of oyster beds? Is that, Mr. publicly available, or is that data that they keep under themselves?
Well, I'm sure it'll be made public available. It should be made public. You can ask.
Yeah,
And-
no doubt. Thank you.
I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I'm going to put you on the spot, Mr. Stokes. Would you be available if Kyle had any questions for you to help to information?
Sure, I'll do what I can.
You thought you retired. You had something?
Let's go to public comments first.
Okay. Public comments?
The only one I had was Mr. Stokes, so if you have anything else.
Yeah, I didn't think you were gonna follow me, so that's all right.
Okay,
And I would prefer if we come up here for public comments and just do the official is state name and address and then. Yeah.
Katie Epps, 605 Sandy Shoals Pass. Regarding the natural resources section, on page 77, bullet 3, under natural resources, there's the statement, preservation and conservation of natural resources support resilient and sustainable communities. I know this is broad strokes, but I think it's a little bit too broad. Can y'all flesh that out a little bit and make it a little bit less vague so it's more concrete? And then the other comment, it is concerning that the impacts of increased development on the ecological communities in and around Bluffton was not considered in greater depth. We are living in an era of human-caused extinctions and loss of biodiversity. This is exacerbated by the loss of habitat due to development and construction. When we read through it, we were sort of expecting to find out an absolute minimum. There might be some language about pollinator, gardens, and ways to discourage pesticide use, stuff like that. We were just looking to see if you can add some more information about ways to mitigate those impacts.
Was that submitted with your comments?
It was.
I apologize because my work schedule, I didn't get a chance to read them all. I just want to make sure we do have that.
And we also included land use because we weren't able to make it Tuesday, so we included land use comments.
Perfect.
Hey, Katie, Commissioner, I'm sorry to interrupt really fast, but just to be clear, you sent your written comments earlier in today, right, from the
Correct.
Palmetto? Okay, great. Yeah, I've got this. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Okay. Al, you got another shot if you want it.
Well, I'm good.
Did we have, in all fairness, even if you didn't write it down, you can always fill out after the fact. Did we have any more public comments? Come on up. I think you have a suggested area for a natural wildlife habitat, right?
Michelle Keel, 22 Trail Ridge Retreat in New Riverside. Couple things I'm getting out of this meeting is it sounds, and like I said, I guess just thoughts coming out of my head are, it doesn't sound like any of the neighborhoods are accountable for the watershed once they get developed. Because we're sounding that people aren't managing the ponds in their neighborhoods. So I guess, is there a way for the town, and I know we're a limited government city, town here, is to maybe start getting with the POAs and create a civilian council for watershed management where the HOAs meet and discuss this?
Let me pause you. That's a great discussion. It's not necessarily a discussion for comp plan, and believe me, your head, my head, and I'm sure Kevin's head and the watershed committee's head is all in that same space. Believe me.
I mean, if it should just could be directed in one of the minutes or something where I can refer that to. So that was the other thing. And the other thing was back to the development. Just I've noticed like in New Riverside, a lot of the developments, like when they first started building out there, there was a bigger buffer where you really didn't see the trees off of New Riverside, and I'm sure some of the other neighborhoods that have been developed, and now it seems like they're right up to the property lines almost. And I know there's buffers that have been agreed to with that, but it just seems, again, that's impacting the watershed because they're right at the edge of the property, and the buffers have gone from, all tree area to now there's 25 feet. So again, I guess that's just something for another committee to discuss and to try to get more buffers to help preserve the watershed on these roads, because like you said, you don't want all these hard sidewalks and stuff like that because it's not going to improve the situation. That's it. Thank you.
Well, to the point, it is, that can be addressed in natural resources is to try and preserve buffers as much as possible. You know, that's a natural resource, the buffers. So, thank you.
Trying to find solutions.
Real quickly, Commissioner Michelle, on that comment, I think we could also probably do a better job in this section when we do some of this inventorying, especially around the water piece, in defining some of these terms, especially with riparian buffers, stressing their importance. Even if there's not a sort of a concrete action associated with that, I think that information, as Michelle rightly points out, would be important to present. So I've made that note. Thank you.
Thanks. Mayor McCracken, would you like to come up and comment?
I allow myself 6 minutes per month, and I've already exceeded that.
Well, you're only going to get this chance once every 10 years, so.
I think I did give Charlotte
You did.
comments, and so, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Received.
Okay, commissioners, any additional comments?
I just had a question, Charlie. And the question is, and probably directed to staff or Kyle, we've talked a lot about pervious versus impervious surfaces. I know Ms. Manning has talked a lot about it. Do we have any action plan to influence PUDs or other things going forward, or attempting to influence going forward to make more of pervious versus impervious surfaces in construction?
We do. What's interesting is that, again, we've talked about the PUDs, we've talked about how they're vested. They're grandfathered into these codes that were written in the late 1980s, and adopted in 1990. So, a lot of this information wasn't necessarily there at that time. I will say that we do work with applicants. A great example is, for some of you, well, I don't know, Charlie, if you were on, for May River Crossing Master Plan, when that came through, they wanted additional parking on their site above and beyond what the minimum requirements were. Well, what we did was just said that, okay, any parking beyond what you're looking to do must be impervious. So I'm sorry, pervious, yes, thank you. Pervious parking. Throughout Old Town, we highly encourage pervious parking. A lot of them, we're actually trying to limit the amount of development that they do anyways. But they still have to have some development. So we are working with individuals. We try to get them to do the pervious pavers where they can. But the whole thing can't be pervious. But we try to. Great one that will be coming back in front of you, the pickleball court. My understanding, I think we have majority of the parking out there is pervious. So it's.
How about the courts? One can ask.
That'll help to cut down on the noise, right?
Yeah.
So we are working with individuals. A lot of the engineers and land planners that are out there, they do go above and beyond what the code requires, and are trying to, because that also helps them in their calculations. That means that less detention is necessary when they can use those pervious pavers. So, and there's tons of options out there. So they'll present it, and as long as it works, we don't have issues with it.
And maybe it's not for this, but just like in other situations, you've said, if a master plan can be opened, there's going to be some things that we're going to try to do. Maybe this ought to be one of those things that we have in our discussion piece to say, well, if it's going to get open for any reason, we're going to talk about pervious surfaces. So that's all.
Okay, that's a good point.
I think we have a couple things in the plan that talk about kind of negotiating and influencing PUDs. Is that something that's helpful to have written as a goal?
To update the development agreements?
No, to kind of, whenever possible, work with them and seek out speaking with them too.
Alternatives?
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's good to have that in there. Like I was saying, the majority of the engineers, land planners that are moving forward with these projects, they are incorporating, that into their design. Again, it's that fine line of, you know, for the development agreements that are there, what they are allowed and contractually to do. But from the development side of things, they are moving forward with that.
But I see where you're going. In our last chapter of the comp plan, it would be good to make that, you hearing us, Kyle? It would be good to make that one of the goals is to, whenever a master plan is up for renegotiation, to look at these key areas that help us with our watershed.
Right.
Question, Kevin. On our new, new regional stormwater manual, is there, I know that there's treatment trains that are part of that they have to deal with, that they have to provide. So they're addressing water differently. Do they cover impervious minimums, maximums?
I'm gonna look to Bill.
Under the new Solo Code Stormwater Design Manual, yes, we do that. We've kind of redone the way we look at how we do treatment trains, and we cover it under stormwater volume and water quality. So under the development agreements and development plans, that are coming in, they have to meet the new stormwater ordinance. So even though the 2004 master plan calls for whatever, they have to meet the new stormwater plan. So we cover impervious surface area, we cover runoff, we cover retention, we cover new ways of treating water, not just with one pond, with one exit. Now we're looking at more infiltration, reuse, different options that they have available, not just one thing fits all. So it is changed all of it.
Is there a maximum percentage of impervious allowed on a development, or is it all just part of a calculation of having to slow that water down through that treatment train?
Yeah, it all has to do with the compliance calculator. So
Okay.
that calculator tells them what the minimum requirements are
This-
per
this is-
site and what's on there.
This is actually something we should do offline.
Yeah, if you want, like,
In fairness to the people in the room, we need to keep it to.
yeah, this could be a 2-day discussion, so.
Okay, any other comments on any of the chapters? Last chance, public. And do I have a motion to adjourn? Second? Second. All in favor? Opposed? Who would oppose adjourning, right?